The entrance mist struck Tess Arlo's tongue with the taste of a chewed battery. Before she could reach the red emergency paddle beside the arch, a plated forearm dropped across her path. Kars Pellin leaned against the breathcourt controls as though the academy had built them for him. Tall even for a Doran, he wore the dark sash of a senior intake prefect over one shoulder. The morning light caught the layered armor along his arms and turned each plate into a thin bronze blade. "Humans wait until the system clears them," he said. "It already cleared me." Tess kept her hands visible. "The mist is wrong." Behind her, the entrance queue slowed. New cadets from a dozen worlds watched from beneath travel hoods and breathing collars. Some looked worried. Others looked relieved that the attention had fallen on someone else. Kars glanced at the scanner. Its ring glowed green. "The court says the air is safe." "My mouth says otherwise." A few cadets laughed. Kars smiled without looking at them. "Then perhaps Earth sent us a cadet too delicate for clean air." The bitterness thickened across Tess's tongue. She pressed it behind her teeth, an old habit from the greenhouse habitats where she had grown up. Bad nutrient vapor had tasted metallic. Failing scrubbers had tasted flat. This was sharper, almost electric, and the mist settling on her gray sleeve was drying into pale branching marks. She pointed to the emergency paddle. "Let me shut the arch down." Kars moved his arm lower. "Touch Academy controls before registration, and your provisional place disappears." The easiest answer would have been to shove him aside. He expected it. His stance invited it, one foot braced, shoulder angled, chin lifted for the crowd. Tess did not give him the story he wanted. She stepped back instead and raised her voice. "Instructor, the sterilant mix is reacting with the mineral dust." A smaller cadet near the front of the line coughed. His face membranes tightened against his cheeks. Kars did not move. Instructor Sela Amrin crossed the court at a fast walk, her pale Neme robes snapping around her narrow legs. She carried a slate in one hand and irritation in the set of her jaw. "What is delaying intake?" "Human anxiety," Kars said. "I have it contained." Tess held out her sleeve. "This residue should not branch, and Cadet Cora is reacting." Sela looked first at the green scanner, then at the coughing cadet, then at Tess's sleeve. For a heartbeat, Tess saw the instructor choose the machine. Then Sela dragged a testing strip through the wet air. Its surface flashed black. She struck the emergency paddle herself. The arch shutters slammed down. Fans roared beneath the stone grating, pulling the mist away from the waiting line. Silence spread across the breath court. Sela turned to Tess. Her expression had changed from annoyance to something harder. "I dismissed your warning before I checked it," she said clearly. "I was wrong. I am sorry, Cadet Arlo." Kars's arm slowly fell away from the controls. The apology landed more heavily than a shout. Tess had expected a correction, perhaps an order to proceed through another entrance. She had not expected an instructor to admit fault while every watching cadet could hear. Sela faced Kars next. "Seal the court. Nobody leaves until medical clears them and the control logs are copied." Kars's mouth tightened. The concentration was within resilience allowance. The concentration burned a test strip. It was meant to discourage applicants who would fail under field stress. Tess stared at him. "You changed it on purpose." Kars met her eyes without embarrassment. "I adjusted it within the range the Academy permits." Sela looked toward the shuttered arch, where the pale branches on Tess's sleeve continued spreading even as the fabric dried. "Then we are not investigating a faulty machine," she said. "We are investigating what this Academy has decided to call safe." The intake gallery overlooked the breath court through a wall of treated glass. By midday, the queue had been moved to another entrance. Cadet Nim Cora had been taken to the infirmary, and Tess's provisional admission had been placed on hold. She sat alone at the end of a long stone bench while officials moved behind the glass, photographing residue and pulling sealed records from the court's control spine. Her tongue still carried a faint metallic edge. Someone had given her water. It made no difference. Sela entered with Kars and closed the gallery door. Without the crowd, Kars seemed less theatrical. He still wore the prefect sash, but one fastening hung loose where Sela had ordered him to remove his control key. Sela placed 3 items on the table: Tess's stained sleeve cover, the blackened test strip, and a slate displaying a clean green line. "The residue says the mist exceeded safe reaction levels," she said. "The official log says the mixture remained normal." Cars folded his hands behind his back. "Because it did." Tess looked from the slate to the salt bloom. "Both cannot be true." "They can if the system records the average after the cycle," Sella said. "A brief spike disappears once the fans dilute it." Cars's jaw flexed. He did not deny it. Sella turned the slate toward him. "Did you order the spike?" "I selected the upper field profile. For an entrance line. For future officers." The words came without heat. That disturbed Tess more than the insults at the gate. Cars was not pretending he had lost control. He believed control was exactly what he had exercised. He looked at Tess. "You noticed it. You remained standing. The court learned something useful." Nim Cora could not breathe. Then the court learned something useful about him, too. Sella's fingers flattened against the table. "Cadet Pellin, you will speak about another applicant as a person, not a failed component." Cars's gaze shifted to the window. Far below, maintenance workers sprayed the stones while the runoff dried into branching white veins. "You have never carried someone out of a field exercise because the academy was too polite to reject them," he said. "I have." The room went still. Cars did not offer the memory like an excuse. He offered it like evidence. "A recruit collapsed during a canyon drill," he continued. "My clutch brother stayed behind to move him. A dust wall reached them before the rescue crawler did. The recruit lived. My brother did not." Tess felt the easy shape of her anger shift. Not disappear, shift. Cars faced Sella again. "You teach that every weakness becomes someone else's weight in the field. I decided we should find the weakness before the field did." "And who authorized you to decide which bodies count as weakness?" Sella asked. "The same academy that rewards us for producing classes that do not break." Sella's expression tightened, but she had no immediate reply. A soft chime sounded at the gallery door. Nim Cora stood outside with a medic beside him. His breathing collar had been replaced by a clear membrane patch across his throat. Sella let him in. Nim avoided Cars's eyes and sat beside Tess. Up close, his skin had the translucent blue-gray quality of wet stone. He looked younger than he had in the entrance line. "You should be in the infirmary," Tess said. "They told me to rest," Nim replied. "I have been resting for most of my life. It has not improved anything." The dry answer surprised a laugh out of her. It was brief, but it loosened something in the room. Sella asked Nim whether the mist had affected him before the coughing began. He nodded. "My throat membrane started closing as soon as the arch activated. I thought it was supposed to hurt." "Why?" "Because the prefect told us, the court revealed whether we belonged here." Sella looked at Cars. He did not look away. Nim touched the edge of his patch. There were others at the transit lodge, applicants from soft atmosphere colonies. One lost her sight for part of the morning. Another vomited until a transport took him away. They withdrew before registration. "How many?" Sella asked. Nim hesitated. "I do not know. Enough that the lodge manager keeps recovery salts behind the desk during intake season." The metallic taste in Tess's mouth sharpened again, though the gallery air was clean. Sella reached for the slate and opened the academy's intake records. She searched by withdrawal date, then by medical transfer, then by pre-registration incident. Nothing appeared. Not 0 cases, no category. The system had no place to count a person who left before becoming a cadet. Sella sat down slowly. "I approved the retention measure," she said. Cars's brow shifted. Sella kept reading. "The Academy evaluates intake staff by the survival and completion rates of enrolled cadets. Withdrawals before registration are treated as travel losses. They never enter the safety data." Tess looked through the glass at the white veins drying across the breath court. "So the Academy can make people sick at the entrance," she said, "and then call itself successful because they never got inside." Sella closed the file. "Yes." It was the quietest word anyone had spoken that day. By evening, Tess had a room but no uniform authorization. Her luggage sat unopened at the foot of a narrow bed in the provisional wing. Until the investigation ended, she could sleep on academy property but could not attend classes, use training equipment, or claim the title of cadet. Nim found her in the common room, studying photographs of the residue on her sleeve. "You are still working," he said. "I am still not admitted." "You could withdraw." "So could you." "I nearly did." Nim lowered himself onto the bench opposite her. "Then I heard the teacher apologize." Tess looked up. He touched the membrane patch at his throat. "Not because you were important, not because someone ordered her. She saw she was wrong and said it while everyone was listening. I had never heard an instructor do that." The comment stayed with Tess after Nim left. She had spent the afternoon thinking of Sella's apology as the first good thing that had happened at Talus Reach. Nim had heard it differently. To him, it had been proof that the academy might still contain people capable of changing direction. Tess returned to the photographs. The residue did not form evenly. The branches were densest where the court mist had crossed the mineral irrigation drifting up from the stone borders. Her family's greenhouse habitats had used similar mineral loops to bind airborne nutrients. When the mix was wrong, deposits formed along the most active pathways. The salt bloom was not merely proof of contamination. It was a map of where the reaction had traveled. She remembered the harvest wing at home after a scrubber fault had dusted every tomato leaf with bitter crystals. The central monitor had reported balanced air because the average across the habitat was acceptable. Her mother had ignored the average and followed the residue from leaf to leaf until she found a stuck nutrient valve. Nothing heroic had happened. They had shut the wing, washed the plants, and spent the night replacing filters while condensation ran down the walls. By morning, the crop had survived. That was how safety usually looked to Tess. Not courage after disaster, but someone taking an ugly little sign seriously before it became one. Talus Reach admired field rescues, decorated endurance, and built memorial walls for cadets who had held positions under impossible conditions. Yet the white branches on her sleeve told a quieter truth. A system could praise survival while training everyone to overlook prevention. The next morning, Sella summoned Tess to the intake gallery. The instructor had not slept. Fine silver shadows marked the skin beneath her eyes. "The review board will not suspend the court on residue evidence alone," she said. "Cars selected a profile permitted by existing policy. The logs cannot establish the duration of the spike. The board says we have an interpretation dispute." Nim's throat is not an interpretation. "I told them that," Sella's mouth tightened. "Procedure requires a controlled reconstruction." Tess understood before Sella finished. "You want me to go through it again? I want the board to witness the system under monitored conditions. You may refuse." "And if I refuse?" "Your provisional admission remains unresolved. Without a completed intake cycle, it will expire." There it was, not a threat from Sella. A machine-shaped trap built from rules that sounded neutral when read separately. Tess moved to the gallery window. Maintenance workers had scrubbed most of the white residue away, but thin traces remained in the joints between stones. What happens if the reconstruction shows a safe cycle? The board will close the complaint. Cars may face discipline for conduct, but the screening method will remain. And my admission? Likely canceled for disruption before registration. Sella did not soften the answer. Tess respected her for that, even while hating the choice. "Then I will do the test," Tess said. Sella was silent for a moment. "I am asking you to accept risk created by my policy." "No, the policy is asking. You are finally saying it out loud." Something in Sella's posture changed. Not relief exactly, but the acceptance of a weight she had been trying to name. "The reconstruction will be stopped at the first unsafe reading," she said. Tess thought of the clean green line beside the blackened strip. "Then make sure someone is watching something besides the reading." Preparations transformed the breath court into a test site. Portable sensors hung from the arches. Medical teams waited beyond the shutters. Transparent barriers separated the observers from the participants. The academy board filled the intake gallery above, their formal collars bright against the glass. Cars stood inside the court without his control key, but still wearing the prefect's sash. Nim had volunteered to participate after medical staff adjusted his throat membrane. Several other delayed applicants joined them, each positioned under a different section of the arch. Tess noticed the desert sky dimming beyond the academy walls. A veil of static dust stretched along the horizon, far enough away that no weather alarm had sounded. Sela followed her gaze. The front is not expected before evening. Expected by whose model? Tess asked. Sela looked at the sky again, then ordered an environmental monitor added to the test. Cars watched the exchange. Every variable cannot become evidence for fear. No, Tess said, but every ignored variable becomes a surprise. The court activated. Cool mist descended through the arch. Tess opened her mouth slightly and breathed through her nose, letting the droplets settle on her tongue. Clean mineral, mild antiseptic, no sharp electrical edge. Sensors remained green. Nim's throat membrane held steady. The first cycle ended without incident. A board member's voice came through the gallery speaker. Increased to the authorized field profile. Sela's hand hovered over the cutoff. Carr stood with his arms at his sides. This is the level used yesterday. Tess did not believe him. Yesterday's reaction had been sharper, but belief was not proof. The second cycle began. Mist thickened around her shoulders. The metallic taste appeared, faint but present. She checked her sleeve. A few pale grains collected near the seam, too scattered to form branches. Report, Sela said through the speaker. Reaction present, below yesterday's level. Cars exhaled through his nose. The sound carried satisfaction, but not triumph. He had expected the system to prove him right because he had lived inside its assumptions for years. The board ordered the cycle held. A minute passed. Then another. No alarm sounded, no strip blackened. The official display remained green. Tess's provisional status marker on the gallery screen shifted from review to likely rejection. Nim looked toward her. His expression asked the question nobody else could answer for him. Had they risked this for nothing? A dry wind struck the academy walls. The sound arrived first as a deep vibration through the stones, then as a hiss of dust against the glass. Blue static crawled across the outer towers. The environmental monitor flashed amber. Sela reached for the cutoff. The court reacted before she touched it. Every mist nozzle opened at once. A white sheet dropped through the arches. The taste hit Tess like a spark against metal. Nim folded forward, hands at his throat. Emergency shutdown, Sela ordered. The shutters descended halfway, stopped, and reversed. Instead of opening the court, the system sealed the entrance and raised internal barriers between the arches. Clean air vents activated overhead. Not all of them. Streams of clear air poured toward cars and the other high-resilience cadets. The vents above Nim remained closed. Tess's opened briefly, then redirected toward a larger Doran nearby. The system was not failing randomly. It was choosing. Sela struck the override in the gallery. Nothing changed. A mechanical voice announced that protective resources were being allocated according to survivability ranking. Cars stared upward as clean air washed over him, while Nim choked a few steps away. For the first time since Tess had met him, certainty left his face. He moved toward Nim. An internal barrier rose between them. Tess dropped to one knee beside the stone border. White branches raced across the damp floor, thickening where the mist crossed mineral runoff. The same pattern as her sleeve, only larger. A map. She followed the densest line to a recessed irrigation control. Sela, I need the border flush. The speaker crackled. The general irrigation is not part of the air system. It is feeding the reaction. I can use it to force the catalyst down. Sela authorized the control. Tess pulled the flush lever. Mineral water burst from the stone borders. For half a breath, the mist thinned. Then the entire court flashed white. Crystals erupted across the grating. Nim cried out as the vapor turned caustic against his throat patch. Tess's exposed hand burned where droplets struck it. She slammed the lever closed. Her first attempt had made it worse. Above the court, board members shouted conflicting orders. Sela's voice cut through them. No more commands unless they move a body or open a system. Tess forced herself to look at the branches instead of the coughing cadets. The general flush had spread minerals through every line, and only some branches had thickened. Those were the vents still carrying the active compound. The residue had redrawn the system for her. "Selective valves," she said. "The irrigation has sectional controls." "Protected beneath the central housing," Sella answered. "The housing cannot be opened during an active cycle." "Then break it." A pause. The gallery glass shuddered as the static front struck again. Sella lifted a metal chair and drove it into the protected control cover. The first blow cracked the casing, the second tore it free. Sparks scattered across the gallery floor. A panel opened beside Tess, exposing a row of manual lines. The court's central louver groaned above Nim. If opened, it would vent the trapped mist into the high extraction shaft. Its counterforce was designed for automated control, but the motor had locked. Cars reached it first. He wedged both plated arms beneath the manual bar and pushed. The louver moved a handspan. The mechanism drove back against him. Armor plates along his forearms scraped with a sound like stones grinding together. "Tess," he shouted. Not human, not fragile, her name. She knelt at the exposed lines. The branches on the floor converged toward several vents. She opened the first matching irrigation valve. Water hammered through one section. The local mist collapsed into heavy droplets and vanished through the grating. She opened the next. A pressure line snapped. Sterilant sprayed across her face. The world became white pain. Tess turned away, but the chemical coated her lips and tongue. The metallic taste flared so intensely it seemed to burn through every other sensation. She could no longer tell clean mineral from active compound. Her advantage was gone. For one terrible moment, panic rose in her chest. The Academy had been right about one thing: weakness became someone else's weight when a body failed. Then she saw the branches. Taste had found the first contradiction. It did not have to finish the work. The residue was already visible across the stone. Tess wiped her eyes and followed the pattern with her hands hovering above it. Dense branch, active vent, thin branch, cleared line. She opened another valve. Across the court, Kars's arms shook. One bronze plate split along its edge. "Release it," Sella ordered through the speaker. "You will lose the joint." "If I release it, the louver closes." His voice broke with effort. Nim had collapsed beneath the narrow opening. The little clean air reaching him came through the gap Kars held. Kars looked down at him. Years earlier, he had watched one person stay behind for someone who could not move. He had built an entire cruelty around never allowing that choice again. Now the choice was his. He lowered his stance and pushed harder. Tess opened the final valve. Nothing happened. The line indicator remained dark. "The last section is isolated," she said. Sella looked at the broken housing. There is a manual bridge beneath the board console. The board chair stepped between her and it. "That bridge feeds the entire intake wing. If you force it, we lose the court for the season." Sella did not argue. She shoved the console sideways, tore the bridge handle free, and drove it down. The Academy floor trembled. Water exploded through the final irrigation line. The white branches dissolved from their tips inward. Mist collapsed into rain. Extraction fans caught the falling vapor and dragged it through the louver cars still held open. The barrier between him and Nim lowered. Kars released the bar and fell beside the smaller cadet, one arm hanging at an unnatural angle. Tess crawled toward Nim. His throat patch had clouded, but his chest moved. Medical teams entered as soon as the shutters unlocked. They lifted Nim first, then Kars, then the other applicants. Tess tried to tell them which vents still held residue, but her words came out thick. A medic touched a light to her eyes and asked what she could taste. Tess opened her mouth. Nothing. Not metal, not mineral, not blood from the split inside her lip. Nothing at all. The review board reconvened in the intake gallery after the breath court had been vented and sealed. Tess sat wrapped in a medical cloak with a cooling patch across her mouth and hand. Nim rested in a support chair beside her. Kars stood at the far wall with his injured arm bound against his chest. The prefect's sash was gone. No one needed a speech explaining what the court had done. The emergency allocation map remained frozen on the central display. Clean air directed toward cadets ranked most likely to survive, while those most in need had been left behind. Sela faced the board. The entrance system did not reveal weakness, she said. It created danger, erased the people harmed before registration, and then used that absence as proof of success. I approved the measure that rewarded those results. My responsibility is part of the record. The ruling that followed was narrow and immediate. The resilience-ranked entrance profile was suspended. Applicants who had withdrawn after medical incidents were offered renewed review. Intake safety would be measured from first contact with Academy property, not from successful registration. No one claimed that every training standard was wrong. No one declared every body equally suited to every field role. They changed what the evidence had proved false. Kars was removed from prefect authority. Expulsion was considered and rejected, not as mercy, but because departure would let him leave the work of correction to others. He would remain under supervision, assist medical staff in contacting harmed applicants, and serve at the breath court without authority over those entering it. When the board asked Tess whether she wished to continue her admission, the cooling patch pulled painfully as she smiled. Yes. Her voice sounded strange without taste anchoring breath and saliva in her mouth, but it remained hers. Sela completed Tess's registration by hand because the court controls were still dead. Before pressing her seal to the form, she paused. The Academy may try to turn what happened into a story about extraordinary human senses, she said. Tess looked at the white residue trapped in the seams of the floor. Then do not let them. My tongue found the problem. The pattern proved it. The system has to work when I am not standing beside it. Sela pressed the seal down. It will. Weeks later, the breath court reopened with independent chemical monitors, manual vent access, and no survivability ranking hidden inside the emergency system. Tess approached it in a cadet uniform. Her sense of taste had not returned. Meals were texture and temperature now, and the healers could not promise when that would change. A small transfer cadet waited ahead of her, staring at the mist arch with rigid shoulders. Kars stood beside the control post in a plain work vest. His injured arm remained braced. No sash crossed his chest. The transfer cadet looked up at him, expecting an order. Kars reached for the barrier strap. He lowered it into the sand and stepped completely out of the path. The cadet walked through. Tess followed. Clean mist cooled her face and settled across her sleeve. When she emerged into the academy, the gray fabric was still unstained.